Hello and welcome to Quick Learn Photography, straight to the point videos which teach you everything that I've learned in the last 10 years of professional photography. In this video we're going to learn about aperture, and by the end of it you're going to know what it is and how to use it. So aperture is really important when it comes to photography. It's in the lens, we'll get that out straight away. So aperture is in the lens. It's nothing to do with the camera body. It's about the lens, and a really good way to describe aperture is like the pupil in your eye. If you saw the last video about shutter speed, I sort of compared the shutter to your eyelids opening and closing, letting light in. So then the pupil in your eye is like aperture. So when it's really bright, if you're outside on a sunny day, your pupils will be really small. When it's really dark, your pupils will go really wide. And it's exactly the same with aperture. So with your pupil, it's how much light it's letting into your eyeball, into your retina and everything, which is like how much light it's letting into the sensor. It's the same principle. It's quite amazing, really. The eyeball is a really good illustration for that. So aperture, it plays a huge effect on your photos and your photography, and it's a great thing to learn to control, and it's actually quite a vital thing to learn to control when it comes to exposure. There is another massive element to aperture that we're going to get onto a bit when it comes to how much is in focus, but the main thing we're going to talk about is the light. It controls how much light. So let me show you with this little lens. If I get the camera to focus, there it is. So you can see that little pinhole there. That's because the aperture is closed down to its maximum. So let's open the aperture up. There it is. And there it is. You can see it going nice and wide now. So that's like the pupil, isn't it, in your eye? So can you see the blades? They move around like that. So if it's a really bright condition, or if you didn't want to let a lot of light in to counterbalance some of the others, then you'd have it small like that. If it was very dark, you'd want that, and it would let more light into the sensor. So when you take a photo, the aperture does that, and it does it to what you want. So sort of midway, further along, or at its widest. So that is aperture, okay? So I hope that makes sense. So aperture is how wide the blades go, letting in light, just like you saw there. So let's say your shutter speed, which you hopefully have learned from the previous video, is at your maximum for the kind of photo you want to get. Say you really want to freeze a subject, sort of like walking speed, you know, say it's really low light and you're at walking speed, you want to capture someone at walking speed. So I want 2/100th of a second minimum. Now, if you're at nighttime or in a low light environment, a dark building or something, a dark room, 2/100th of a second on your shutter isn't going to let a lot of light in. It's going to really struggle. So then what will help is if you get your aperture at its widest like that. So you can do that and it will let more and more light in. Okay, so then it balances the exposure triangle a little bit. There's another variable to that, ISO, which I'm going to get on with the next video. So you can open your aperture with the controls to its widest point. You can't really do this on mobile phones. They're kind of stuck on one aperture, which is fine, but on proper lenses and cameras, even small little cameras, you can control the aperture because it will have those blades that will make it wider. So let's say you're at 2/100th of a second, you want to freeze someone walking in a dark environment. You get the aperture as wide as possible, and then it lets more light in, and therefore the sensor's not going to struggle. If that's not enough either at your widest, then we move on to ISO, which is what I'm going to get onto the next video. But that's what aperture does. It lets more light in, or it closes more light down, just like your eyeball, whether it's really bright or whether it's really dim. Okay, so that's what aperture is. Now, there's all these different stops you'll see on different lenses. Some lenses start at f1.2. f1.2, that's crazy wide. That's like crazy wide. This one is f1.8, so that goes pretty wide there. You can see that, f1.8. Then f2.8, and so it just keeps going up, and you can control the aperture as well. I'm going to show you in a bit, demonstrating it on a camera. You can control the increments, but your widest one whatever lens you get. So this one starts at f1.8, and then I can control it to f2, f2.5, f2.8. A lot of the cheaper lenses, the beginning lenses, nothing against them, they start at f3.5, which is sort of less, about half what this is. f3.5 would be kind of like that. No, about that. Whereas f1.8, oh no, that's not right. Anyway, it's wider, it's twice as wide, okay. And then that lets in half the light, so your sensor is going to start struggling a little bit more. So there's all these increments. So f2.8, f3.5, f4, f5.6, and so on and so on. You can stop right down to f11, f22, where it'll be like tiny like that, okay? So that's what the f-stop means. You've probably seen the symbol for that f and a digit to it. And a lot of lenses, sort of beginner lenses or variable aperture lenses, I'm going to get into what they are later. I'm not going to overcomplicate things. They start at f3.5. So if you're in a dark environment, you want the aperture at f3.5 because that's going to be the widest and it's going to let more light in, okay? So that's about how it lets light in, just like your eyeballs. Nice and simple. The wider it is, the more light comes in, the less the shutter speed, and the sensor is going to struggle. And the faster the shutter speed can go. It's like a balancing act. So the wider the aperture, the faster the shutter speed can go, which will lead to sharper, more crisp images. Now, there's another side to aperture that plays a really, really important role, and that is shallow depth of field. So when you're at 1.8, like this one, it will isolate the subject, and then what's behind is blurry. And the more you zoom in, I'm going to get into that later, so don't worry about that. That's called compression, and we'll deal with that on another video. But when you zoom in at a shallower depth of field or a wider aperture, you really isolate the image, and you know the background will be really, really blurry. I don't know if I can do it here actually, so let's see if it focuses on my finger. Got to watch the eye autofocus. So if I change the aperture, there we go, so f4, f5.6. So see the background is getting more in focus. Let's try it here. And then if I drop the aperture down to f2.8, there it is. See the background? Oh yeah, that's done it lovely. Look at the background there, completely out of focus. So there's that pop. So I'm going to drop the aperture now, f4, f5. Look at the background, f7, f8, f11, f14, f16, 18. And look, the background is getting more in focus. So let's drop it down to its widest again, f2.8, which is this lens. Look at the background there. I didn't plan that, but that's a pretty good demonstration. Right. I'm going to do that properly on the back of the camera and show you some images. So you can get more in focus, and sometimes you want that. A lot of landscape photographers, they have f11 because they want the majority of things in focus. But if you're doing like portrait or really isolating the subject, then you want a lower aperture as well. Now, if you want a lower aperture purely to get more background blur behind you, then that's going to let a lot more light in. So let's say you're outside and you think, I want it at the lowest aperture, so f2.8, like what this lens can do that I'm videoing with. That's going to let in so much light, so your shutter speed is going to go through the roof. So you will have to adjust the shutter speed to go really, really fast to let less light in, okay? So it's a balancing act, but we're going to talk about that, about the exposure triangle later on. So that's what aperture is. Let's look at some examples now of how it works. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I can see myself on my phone, which I've got rigged up to the camera. So I'm going to demonstrate the light effect with aperture. So this lens is now at its widest, which is f2.8. So that's quite wide, all right? So I think I can control it from here. Yes, I can. So let's notch the aperture down now, okay? So this is f2.8. Also, sorry, I forgot to say, I've switched off the auto ISO. So we're at the base level ISO, that's 100. So it's not going to go any higher. It's not going to help with the light at all. The shutter speed is kind of maxed out because this is video, but I'm going to show that in another video about how to balance all three. This is just about aperture, okay? So we're at f2.8. Let's notch it up, f3.2. So all that's changing is the aperture. f4, f4.5, f5. You can see the difference it's making. So that's f5.6 now. So that's really cutting out a lot of the light, and nothing else is helping at all. The ISO isn't helping, the shutter speed isn't helping. So this is aperture. So you can see the advantage of having a wide aperture. It lets in a lot more light. So let's double that to say f11. All right, so you get the point. So that's f11 now. There's still more to go to really kill it down. Now sometimes with things like aperture or anything, shutter speed, ISO, shutter speed, you need to control that to freeze movement, but aperture you don't. So let's say you want to keep an ambient shot like this. So now I'm at f4.5, it's quite dark and moody, and I could add a light to myself and that, but say you want this effect like a low light restaurant, see the nice glows there with the lights and all that, you may want to keep that in the shot, and aperture helps with that. So controlling the aperture. So let's get it back to a good exposure. It's great, I can control this from the phone. So that's f3.5. So this is like an entry level lens, a beginner lens, a kit lens, and it usually starts at f3.5. So this is how much light it will let in, which is still pretty good. So if you start zooming, it will lose it. I'll get into that later in another video, but f3.5 is quite wide and can help let in more light. So if I go down to f2.8, there you go. So that's the exposure we had before. So that's what aperture does with light. The wider it is, the more light comes in. So yeah, I hope that helps. So here's my trusty model we're going to demonstrate aperture with. You'll be seeing more of her in future videos because I use her for training, for headshots and portraits and that. She's always very willing to work. So we're at the widest aperture this lens has got at the moment. This is the one that I video with. It's so I'm at f2.8 at the moment. So what I'm going to do is start ramping up or ramping down the aperture. So now we're at f3.5. Now what to look out for during this, is the bricks here. Look at the bricks. So 3.5, f5, f7.1, f8, f9, f10, f11. Bearing in mind it's focused right on her face. f14, f18, f22. So now the background is in focus. Everything looks pretty sharp. So if I drop it down all the way down to f2.8, see the background getting blurry there. Okay, so that's a demonstration of aperture and some illustrations, and yeah, it's a really important thing to learn. Shutter speed and aperture, they kind of work together, and you can get some great effects with aperture as well. Now, if you've got a beginner lens that only starts at say f3.5 and it changes the more you zoom, don't worry about that, just learn with that, and then later on we'll get on to aperture with like prime lenses and fixed aperture lenses. So we don't overcomplicate things, but there are lenses that have a wide aperture constantly where you can keep that low light ability or that massive shutter depth of field, but we'll worry about that later. This is just about what aperture is and what it does. So thanks for watching, and I hope it helped.